Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Dr. Glenn is a clinical psychologist and former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leaving the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, this is the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston, and I'm here with John Chancellor from Teach the Soul. How are you, John?
I'm doing well, and how about you?
I'm good. I forgot to say that I'm from defeatyourcravings.com, but now I did. I'm good. I'm always excited to talk to you. I really like this book you've been developing. I think some people don't recognize how much goes into selecting a group of quotes and figuring out what they mean and how to organize them, and more importantly, how to make it useful wisdom for everyday life. I've always been a big fan of what I would call bathroom books, things where you can read a couple of pages a day and feel like you really got something out of it. And I'm excited that this book will be coming out soon in printed format, so I can have it sitting in my bathroom. We're talking about words to live and work by. Could you maybe just talk a little bit for a moment about the process of developing this and why it was important to you and why you're putting your heart and soul into this at this time?
I guess there are two reasons. One, I think I tend to be a natural teacher or sharer. When I learn something, my natural reaction is to want to share it with others, that I'm so excited that I've learned something that I want to share it with others. The other thing, as a child, I was constantly reminded of things by my mother, and instead of sitting down and kind of telling a story or teaching something, going through a long explanation, she would simply quote something, a lot of times from Aesop's fables or from John Haywood. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched. Don't cry over spilt milk. Two heads are better than one. And that just became a second nature to me to remember those things. And as I got a little older, I started saying, I wonder where she heard those. I wonder where she learned those. And I've been collecting quotes. I would write them down on 3x5 cards. I've been collecting quotes for, I guess, most of my adult life. The other thing that has always been interesting to me is how things work. And the most interesting thing when you start delving into how things work, the most interesting thing is human beings, because I think we're the most complex thing on earth. And as you well know, because you're a clinical psychologist, we often do some things that don't make sense on the surface. But if you dig deeper, you can generally find an explanation. And I've always been fascinated about what's the underlying reason for this behavior, because it's a lot easier to learn by looking at somebody else and seeing what they did right or wrong and using that as a model or a guide than trying to learn everything yourself.
That has definitely been the story of my life, too. Not the quotes, but the fascination with what makes people tick and the stories that they tell and how much I can learn from the stories that they tell. Okay, so do you want to talk about a couple of quotes today?
Well, I want to talk about a story or two. And the first story is about snakes, wasps, and mosquitos.
I thought this was going to be snakes on a plane. Okay.
No, snakes, wasps, and mosquitos. And I'm going to start with a quote from Oscar Wilde. Man cannot be too careful in the choice of his enemies. So, Glenn, if I ask you whether you would prefer to be in a room with a snake, a wasp, or a mosquito, which would you choose?
Mosquito. It would be annoying, but
right.
Less dangerous.
And actually, I think that's what most people would choose. I would be deathly afraid to be in a room with a snake. Even if I knew it were non-poisonous, it would still bother me. I certainly would not want to be in a room with a wasp. I would choose a mosquito, but that's the answer that I generally get is give me the mosquito. It's easy enough to swat and that sort of thing. But everybody knows that snakes can be deadly, and wasps can actually be deadly too if you're allergic to them.
Which I am.
Okay. And even if you're not allergic to a wasp and it's not deadly, their sting can be quite painful. And in comparison, the mosquito bite seems to be nothing more than a minor nuisance and irritant. But as with so many things in life, the biggest danger is not always the one you would expect. In the United States, there are only about 12 deaths per year from snake bites. On average, wasps cause about 50 deaths per year.
Really?
Yes, in the U.S. Now, if you expand out worldwide, mosquitoes are a totally different story. Worldwide, there are about 500 million cases of malaria each year, killing between 1 and 3 million people.
Really?
Yes. Even though malaria is rare in the U.S., there still tends to be more deaths from mosquitoes or from a mosquito-borne illness than from snakes or wasps combined, even in the U.S.
By a factor of about 100 million or 10 million, right?
No, the 3 to 5 million is worldwide. In the U.S., there's probably a few hundred mosquito-borne deaths per year. But still, it's a lot more than you think. So now we're going to ask you another question. What do you think this means to your audience? What lesson can they learn from this?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. I can understand that because it's probably a little obscure right now. So let me share with you how this applies to other things in life. Most people have trouble jumping from this quite interesting to me anyway, fact and how it applies to things in life. We tend to worry about the big things. When we get on an airplane, is the plane going to crash? When we do anything that's big, we worry about what's the danger of it. We worry about the big dangers in life. But as we learn from the mosquito, it's sometimes the little things, it's often the little things that have the greatest negative impact on our lives. Now, can you see the connection?
I can. I can let you say it if you want to, or I can say it if
No,
you want me to.
I would love for you to share with people the connection.
Okay. And I actually remember a study in graduate school as you were talking, which documented that the amount of media attention that an incident receives is disproportionate in inverse proportion to how frequently it occurs. So if somebody slips and falls in the bathtub, it's extraordinarily unlikely that that's going to make the 5 o'clock news.
Absolutely.
But if there's a case of botulism or a terrorist attack or an airplane crash, that's going to be on the news for sure. And as a result, people are frightened of the wrong things. When it comes to overeating and, feeling destroyed by your cravings, feeling at the mercy of your cravings, people tend to be worried about, well, what if I can't stick to my plan in the future? Let's say I'm not going to have chocolate during the week. What if I can't stick to it when I don't have Glenn's help, or when I'm not as motivated to read this book, or when I'm at a party, or when I'm with my sister's cousin's aunt's parakeet or something like that? What they don't realize is that, first of all, the horrific binges tend to be few and far between. Like if you actually plot out how you've eaten over the course of the month, most people are eating decently at least 80% of the time, right? But more importantly, what they don't realize is that it's the decision you make right now that makes all the difference, because you can only ever eat healthy in the present moment. The present moment is the only time that you can eat. And by taking yourself out of the present and worrying about these times in the future, you're actually making it possible for you to feel uncertain and anxious and too weak to resist the impulse now. On the other hand, if you recognize that now happens all the time, it's the most frequent thing that occurs. And if you always use the present moment to be healthy, well, then not only is the future an infinite string of nows, so that when that hypothetical time in the future that you were going to give into your cravings arises, it'll still be now. And so you can still say, well, I'll just eat healthy now again. But also the ability to bring yourself back to the present and eat healthy in the present is kind of like a muscle. You could call it your binge-free now muscle or your eat healthy now muscle. And so if you keep practicing that every day, day in and day out, if you keep practicing that and bringing yourself back to the present moment and eating healthy, then your eat healthy now muscle is going to be stronger in the future and not weaker. So there's actually less reason for you to worry about the future if you keep yourself in the present. But most people allow their inner food enemy to distract them with these concerns about what's going to happen in the future, not recognizing that, first of all, those times are more rare than your opportunity to eat healthy in the present. And secondly, that you can eradicate that trouble by just flexing your binge-free now muscle. And, it's what you do day in and day out every day. It's not what you're worried about in the future that makes a difference. So I think they're worried about snakes and wasps when they should be worried about the tiny little decisions they're making, the mosquito. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I will just say what you've said slightly different. I think that everybody needs to be alert and aware of some of the mosquitoes in their life, which are the mundane, everyday things that can really do a lot of damage. Most fast foods are mosquitoes, sedentary lifestyles, poor exercise habits, things like that. Those are mosquitoes. And the mosquito bite seems to be minor, but it literally kills millions of people each year. So don't overlook the everyday things in life that can do significant damage over time. And I finish with a quote from Booker T. Washington. Success in life is founded upon attention to the small things rather than to the large things, to the everyday things nearest to us rather than the things that are remote and uncommon. Be aware of the mosquitoes in your life.
So, John, let's just talk about some very specific mosquito examples in overeating. There are things that people do every day that they don't think of the 5-year value of. And so let's just talk about putting cream in your coffee, for example. And if you want to have cream in your coffee, more power to you. And there are a lot of people who think that's good for you. And I don't want to argue with that, but I just want to say, just calorically, that it's an opportunity. If you look at the 5-year value of 50 calories a day, 365 days a year for 5 years, how many calories do you think that is?
I wouldn't have a guess.
It's 91,250 calories.
Wow.
If I divide that by 3,500 calories, it actually adds up to about 26 pounds.
Wow. And that's assuming people have just 1 cup a day. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's also assuming that if you eliminate it, you're not replacing it with something else.
But my point is that every coffee drinker I know has more than one cup.
Right. And so if you're holding an extra 20 or 30 pounds, it might be that looking for a mosquito like that to eliminate could make all the difference.
Absolutely. I think that people need to be aware of the phenomena of it's the small things that are really close to us that we just kind of overlook that are the real dangers in life. So watch out for the mosquitoes.
Watch out for the mosquitoes. Okay.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. If you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.